leading us off after that break is the amazing Sandra Serkes. Sandy is the CEO of Valora Technologies, and we're actually here at Valora Technologies today. She has a list of accomplishments that's nothing short of astounding. I said this before. She's a graduate of both Harvard Business School, and MIT. She's a frequent industry speaker and panelist, an active participant in the Women Presidents Org, the Commonwealth Institute, the MIT Enterprise Forum, the Massachusetts Software Council, and the network of Harvard alumni. Sandy serves on the boards of several technology and service startups and was named a woman to watch by Women's Business Magazine. Let me now turn it over to the amazing Sandra Serkes.
Thank you, Nick, and everyone at the Information Coalition. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with everyone. I'm going to be talking today about data mining corporate email and attachments. It's a hot topic. It shows up in pretty much every corporation on Earth. And it's a big problem for people because there are different storage mechanisms all over the place. Every attachment is different. And that is honestly usually where the content of what people are trying to get at lives. So it's a big hot topic, and I will do my best to kind of explain to people how to deal with it. Okay, so let me start at the top. Why bother doing this data mining of email? What's driving it? How do you do this? How do you get started? What do you need to know? What are the gotchas? That's really the agenda that I'm going to cover today. And I'm going to start in at the very top with why bother doing this at all. So there are a lot of driving factors behind getting our collective arms as a society around the information that we contain in our documents and in our files and in our organizations, not the least of which, of course, is litigation. And as I'm talking, I and my company come from a kind of litigation support services background, so we have kind of a natural bent in that direction. But today, litigation is part of course, the much larger umbrella of information governance. And so you find its brethren kind of right alongside investigations, compliance, and then the less onerous flavor of information management, business intelligence. Because once you are inside a document population and learning what the contents contain and how they can be used and what the risks are and what the benefits are, you might as well kind of get both sides of the equation as long as you're evaluating data. You can look for the risks, but you can also gain the benefits. And that's where some of these kind of ladder bullets come into play. So these kind of industry or maybe even government activities are driving the need to understand what email says, what the attachments say, not just to store those somewhere in a database, but to have active understanding of the content and active management of that content. Not all of it needs to be retained. Some of it needs to be highly protected. Some of it needs to be acted on at certain times. And so that's all part and parcel with the drive to data mine. And when I say data mine, I actually use a couple of phrases kind of interchangeably. Data mining is one of them. Another one would be predictive analytics. It's the technique by which we do data mining. You'll also hear me saying tagging or indexing or coding. All of these are essentially the same phrases for getting at the information that's contained in the content of electronic files or possibly even scanned paper files. When I talk about documents or files, it's a little bit of a loose term. Really what I'm talking about is content. And where does content live inside an organization? Technically, almost anything can be considered content. So we often think of content as, let's say, the body text of an email or the attachment, the Word file that is attached to an email that has content. But really, almost anything in modern business communication and business activity contains content. So content often is in the form of text, or it can be made into text. So if you think of something like a voicemail, which using speech-to-text technology can become a text base for doing content analytics on text, almost anything would be in that category, and you'll see a number of them here in this orange box. So that would cover anything that literally has physical text, anything that has sound, which can be made into text, and even things that we don't typically think of as a document per se because they're a little bit more transient, like a tweet or a chat window or something like that. They're kind of ephemeral, but of course they are content. They do contain text. So occasionally you'll hear me also use the phrase DDC. That's for data, document, or content. Again, I tend to use those interchangeably because as far as a data mining technique goes, we don't really care about the type of text or the source of that text. We just care that it is text. And so everything that sort of has text, you'll hear me say a document, I really mean text. So if I slip or I use interchangeable words, you'll know what I'm saying. And then finally, the real push behind data mining is to learn what the documents are, where they live, where they came from, whether or not they should still be in existence, and with what types of permissions, and then ultimately what they say. The whole goal of data mining email and attachments is to gain control of what is historically just a completely untamed beast. And so, that's really the message behind information governance in general, but we're going to talk today specifically about email and attachments because in many ways they might be the biggest offenders of this kind of data run amok environment. So who is doing this? Who's kind of leading the charge to say that's it? We're taking control of the unruly email scenario. We've seen a couple of drivers here who are kind of leading the charge. The first would definitely be kind of forward-thinking multinational corporations. And the reason that they're doing this is because there's so much business activity that demands the coordination and understanding of email, and they're constantly in it. It's usually someone in the legal department that's driving this. It may or may not be part of a larger IG or information governance initiative, but what we're seeing is that it's happening at the departmental level. And the reason for that, we're going to hit this a couple times today. The reason that that's happening is because that's about the maximum complexity that these organizations can handle at a time. Ultimately, of course, the goal is to have the whole organization properly governed and with controls in place on everything. But the goal right now, what we're seeing, is to get certain key departments under control first and make those the sort of showcase departments to get, the next department or several departments down the line kind of in league with the showcase department. So that's kind of what we're seeing with, kind of the large multinationals. Another big driver are the law firms themselves. They are the ones who are outside counsel to those multinationals, and increasingly, large corporate law departments are demanding that their partners and their outside counsel behave the way they themselves do. It's not acceptable for just the inside counsel in the organization itself to take control of data. Everyone who services them or has access to that data, which outside counsel surely would have, has to follow suit. And so we're seeing a huge push, especially this year, 2016, amongst the large law firms to be able to get not only their own kind of emails and attachments in line, what would really be considered work product, but also all of their kind of information governance controls about the outside data, their client data that they are managing. And so there's just a tremendous push right now amongst the larger law firms to, since that's the primary way they communicate with their clients is email, to really get email and attachments under control. In fact, that's going to be the case example that we use throughout the rest of this presentation. The last area where we're seeing a big push for getting email and attachments under control are those that have heavy compliance concerns. Again, email is generally the primary communications mechanism in these vertical industries, followed by a close second, by the way, of instant messaging, chat messaging. which is really kind of almost a cousin of email, has a lot of the same type of data elements that email has, and it's even less structured, so therefore more problematic. And since these industries essentially run on communications of this nature, there's a big, big push to get them under control. I like to talk about data mining email because it's a very, very good example of information governance as a kind of unit lesson. Everybody understands what email is. Everybody uses email. You cannot exist in corporate America today without using email. And it's been that way for at least 10 years. And so we have, as a society, as a kind of business culture, we have over a decade of email in every single corporation just kind of lying around like a big mess. I mean, it is really the prototypical example of how to get, you know, an organization in control like information governance. So as I said, a universal issue. It kind of touches on a number of key IG problems that you hear over and over again. We're going to talk about all of these things. The storage and hosting. Where do you keep all this email? Is it active? Is it on an offline server somewhere? Remember, of course, you know, give you a little bit of my lit support background here. If it exists, it's discoverable. And so there's a kind of big push to get control of what exactly does exist and where and why and should it. Because if it's just there willy-nilly, it can be subpoenaed. So, you know, it kind of hits on a lot of these same problems that you see in nearly any IG scenario. One of the nice things about email from a kind of data mining perspective is that it goes both backwards and forwards in time. For those who are not familiar, backfile is a phrase that we use to mean essentially the stored up pile of documents. So backfile email would be everything since you turned the email system on in, let's say, in 1994 through today, through right this second of me speaking. That is backfile. And day forward is the emails that you are going to write or receive or forward or store tomorrow, the next day, and on forward into the future. So really the only reason that we make a distinction there is because generally, not universally, but generally, the backfile is bigger than the day forward, certainly on a day-by-day basis. Also, the backfile tends to be where the problem is because it's out of date. It may contain communications from people, almost certainly, who are no longer in the organization. It may cover topics that are no longer important or relevant. And it may contain, you know, depending how old your email is, it may contain storage systems that are no longer in use. You have some Lotus Notes email floating around there. The backfile tends to present the bigger problem. ESI, if anyone's not familiar, stands for electronically stored information, is generally easier and a lower cost to kind of get your arms around than paper. You don't have to go through a scanning conversion process to make things go from physical to digital. Email, of course, is born digital. Most of the time the attachments are born digital as well, although that's certainly not always the case. You could very well have a scanned image be an attachment. It's very common. It was very common about 5 years or so ago. That was the way in which we kind of managed contracts. You would print it out, literally physically sign a document, and then scan it back in. Well, once you've done that, you now have an image file. You really don't have a native. That's really not a native ESI. And so email, because of the attachments issue, kind of has to deal with a little bit of both sides. Mostly documents and content that were born digitally, but also the occasional kind of wild card that is the attachment. The attachment is kind of the loose cannon of email because literally anything can be an attachment. Even a virus can be an attachment. If you've ever gotten, you know, email from a Nigerian prince, you know what I'm talking about. The ESI nature of email makes it easy for most people to get started. So again, if you are kind of thinking about how do I get my arms around all the information that we have in this organization, I would point you towards email as a good starting point. obviously, email, that's enterprise email management there, EEM, it's a hot button issue right now. And the reason is because email has two magic pieces. It's not just content, it is also communication. And so in a legal context, there's heavy, heavy meaning to that second notion of communication. It's not just that the content exists, it's that one person literally communicated it to another. So you have notions of who is the author or the creator, the knowledge holder of this information, and who is the recipient. And you have email's very good. It comes with a timestamp, and sometimes it comes with proof of delivery. With the options that you can set in your email upon the notification of receipt, that sort of thing. It's essentially, that's the digital equivalent of proving that somebody received the content. So because of that, email has an extra special kind of superstar status in terms of text and analytics, because there's the nature of the content itself, plus the fact that it was literally transmitted from person to person to person, almost like a disease, except maybe not so onerously, although sometimes. And so because of that, again, email is an excellent place to start in your document analytics kind of course, because it will help you not just get your arms around the content, but it will help set you up for any kind of government inquiry, litigation, investigation, where you have to answer questions about who knew this, who did this, who caused this, who was aware of it. Email is going to give you that who element in a way that a lot of other content does not. And then I kind of alluded to this earlier. Email really is the predecessor to managing social media. The closest match to email, of course, would be text message, instant message, chat. All of those things have a lot of the same elements that email have. They have an author and a recipient. They have the parties that are engaged in the chat or in the text messaging. It has the content, the body content. It has a time signature. About the only thing missing between email and sort of social media is typically a title. And since today's analytics can basically infer a title, you can get that too. So getting your arms around email, again, there's a lot more stored up email than there is stored up social media, is definitely the kind of first step to getting your arms around the social media, cyclone that's occurring now, and 3 years from now will be the backfile disaster. Okay. So let's dive right in to how a computer actually does this. What do you mean? You keep saying data mining, data analytics. How does a computer do this? So I'm going to use a simple example of a large law firm that is, of course, regularly in email communication with clients. And the object of the kind of data mining effort is to classify emails based on their content into matter name or matter number. In other words, this is the Smith versus Jones case. This content here belongs in that kind of classification filing system. Most organizations, if they don't already have one, will very shortly, and certainly if we're advising them, they will, have a taxonomy, which is essentially an information folder structure. Even if all you have is Windows Explorer and you're pretty good with your filing and you're sort of, this is a parent level file and these are children files, that's a taxonomy. And you need some sort of organization, some sort of taxonomic organization, so that you can store information into client matter name or number. You might have 16 different matters with the Smith Corporation, so you can envision that in your head. There's going to be a Smith Corporation top level folder, and then each matter may be underneath, or each year, or each kind of attorney at the firm. However it is you want to structure that, taxonomy is fine, but you need to have one. So we're going to take you through a kind of very standard approach where the taxonomy is typically by client name first, and then a sub-level of matter name or matter number. And we're going to show you how the computer does that. So here we go. Here's an email from mock attorney Stuart Trumbull from Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. No, not a real law firm. And those are, if you call those phone numbers, that you'll be calling Valora. We'd love to say hello to you. And so what you have here is just an absolutely stereotypical email. It's from a partner on the case, Stuart Trumbull, to the paralegal that works for him saying, please file this motion in limine with the Passaro matter. And here's the matter number. This could not be a more perfect email for content analytics. There's all kinds of clues in the content of this email about what's going on here. And so I'll show you what the computer is looking for when it sees this email. So the first thing it finds is that there it says from : Stuart Trumbull. Okay, that's a pretty dead ringer that he is the author of this email. But it's not the only one. There are several other indicators that Stuart Trumbull is the creator of the content in this, of the body content in this email, and the author. Remember, that has important weight. The author of this, and sometimes you'll hear the phrase, he's the content holder or the content owner. He is the one responsible for this email, should there ever be any question. So here are some of the other indicators. His signature line, what we would call a validation. So we now have two data points on the same document that indicate Trumbull. Trumbull is really looking like the author. And by the way, look at all this delicious information we have about him. Okay, we now know he works for Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. We have phone numbers in which to reach him. We know his title. We know his email address up here at the top. We know an awful lot about Stuart Trumbull. So in the event he shows up in some other document later down the line, very likely if he works for this law firm, then even if somebody just says, yeah, I saw Stuart Trumbull on the street, we know who that is. And the data mining activity does a little bit of what I call triangulation and says, Trumbull, Trumbull, Trumbull. I've heard that before. Where have I heard that before? And it goes back over its history and looks for every indicator, positive or negative, about who Trumbull is. And it's essentially kind of like a little detective and pulling clues together and saying, I know this entity. Stuart Trumbull is not just a phrase on this document. He's a person, and he's the author. And I know who he is. Here's his little V card basically right here. So if I ever encounter him in another context, I can pull that information that I know. It's almost like pulling a file on him and apply that to another circumstance. So just kind of bear that in the back of your mind. That's a little bit how data analytics works. And it's basically sort of like a little super genius that knows everything you ever told it and never forgets anything. And then it can use all those clues that it's stored up over time and kind of pick and choose which ones to use when, in particular by adding confidence weights to those clues. You know, did Stuart Trumbull author 75 emails that week? Probably. They're all going to have his V card. Each one of those validates him with this information that much more every time it appears, as opposed to a random one-off, you know, maybe it was just spam. It's one email and 40 million. You know, we're going to make that have much lower weighting. We'll get into that a little bit more later. I just wanted to point it out while you see it. There's actually another indication that Stuart is the author, and that's here. It says, thanks, comma, new line, Stuart. Okay, again, a good triangulating data mining system is going to be able to recognize that thanks, comma, new line is typically a closing salutation in English communication. And so whatever comes after that is very likely an author. So there's actually 3 indicators of authorship that all point to the same person on this one document. So now let's get into what the actual goal of this was, which was to classify this email by matter. Well, of course, this one's a slam dunk. It's actually in here twice. We have the name, Passaro matter. Thanks very much, Stuart. And he was also kind enough to put the matter number in. Again, sort of think of it as 2-factor authentication for content analytics. So in this case, it's a slam dunk as to who this is going to. Just a couple other points of note about when a software system like ours called Powerhouse what else it sees when it's kind of evaluating a document. Somebody once told me it was a little bit like gene sequencing a document. I really like that. I think that's a good analogy. What's going on when Powerhouse or any other analytics system is looking at this? Okay, it's realizing there's an attachment and going, ooh, attachment. Now this is not a very helpful attachment. It's maybe got a date, looking like a date in the beginning there, March 24th, and some numbers that have no relation to anything. But an analysis of the content tells us, please file this motion in limine. That's a court filing. It's a very specific document used in a court case. It's trying to limit the aspects of a case. And so that has positively ID'd what this attachment is. So that's what you see here, sort of an implied attachment and what we call a document type, the type being motion in limine. Very specific document type. That's good. You always want to get as specific as you can. You can always generalize up, but it's very hard to specific down. So you always want to get the most specific that you can find. At the end of the day, the result is, the software has looked at this document, it's parsed everything here, it's come up with all of this data and plenty more that I didn't even get into, and said, I got it. It goes to the Passaro folder. And it goes to matter number 34-6788. And it is going to positively classify this document into the correct location. And it probably took me maybe 5-10 minutes to explain this. It probably takes less than half a second for it to actually occur in real-time analytics. So in the time that I've been giving this presentation, it's already assessed and classified and moved on to 16 different custodians. So just to give you a feel for the rate at which this is occurring. So that was, of course, an astute observer will say, yeah, but that was a slam dunk email, Sandy, and you're right. So not every email is so beautiful and just a layup for analytics that way. Some of them are harder. Let's look at a harder one. So here's another email. This time it's to Stuart, but it's from Curtis Crowley, an associate also at the same firm. And if you look at this closely, it's very subtle. If you don't know anything a priori or you don't have any other knowledge about the matters that Dewey Cheatham undertakes, you'd be hard-pressed to classify this document. However, one of the best things that you can do to a predictive analytics system is give it feeder input information. For example, if we were doing a classification matter for a large law firm, we would ask the law firm, can you give us a list of your staff? We want a list of everyone who's an attorney and everyone who's not an attorney, by the way, because those have different meanings in the legal world. So give us a list of your professionals. And if you can, give us a list of all the client matters that you have. You'd be surprised sometimes how many are missing off of something like that, but good start anyway. And perhaps anything else you can tell us about the matter. Who are the parties in the matter? Your client, the opposing parties, what court was it in? Whatever it is that they can supply, that's going to become fodder for the predictive analytics system to try and make associations. So now if you had a list somewhere that listed Bellingham as an opposing party, and you know what cases Stuart Trumbull works on, let's say, or you can derive that by looking at emails like the previous one. We know for sure that Trumbull works on the Passaro matter. So if Bellingham is listed somewhere as an opposing party to Passaro, now we can start to make those triangulating links. So let's see what happens. Okay, here's a name. Okay, he's the CFO of Passaro. That's very helpful. Bellingham was the opposing party in one of the Passaro matters. Okay, implied. We can, with reasonable certainty, with reasonable confidence, put that into this classification. Okay, but you can see the squishier, more uneasy. Let's say the prior email was, basically 100% confidence. Maybe this one's around 85%. And part of the art and science of tuning predictive analytics systems is understanding where is the line. Where is the fall off from confidence where you really should not trust it? Is it up at the 75% mark? Is it down at the 10% mark? And there isn't a hard and fast answer to that. It really depends on each scenario. And this is why you want a smart data scientist on your team, because it's not just, 66%, that's the mark. It really is highly dependent on each scenario. And so you want to kind of do that analysis on the fly and figure out where the mark is. And it may be different for different types of documents or different types of things that you are assessing for, different types of classification. So take note on that. There's no magic line. A lot of people think that there is and there isn't. But if you want me to put a number in the sand, I would say don't go below 75% confidence. Okay, but really is kind of scenario specific. Okay, so where is an impossible email? Where is, I don't care what kind of analytics you're using, it is never going to get it. Here's an impossible email. Look very closely here. This email is to Curtis Crowley, the associate, and it's from God only knows, Crazy Cat. No clues in the email address. No, I'm sorry, it's from Curtis to her. No particular info, Amy. Amy what? Could be Amy anything. And no particular clues in the content except perhaps the father. Well, who's Amy? Who's her father? What on earth does she have to do with this guy Crowley? And God help us, what matter are we talking about? We have kind of reached the level of text analytics here, and the confidence is going to be too low. Whatever it comes up with, I guarantee you it's going to be like 2%. And this would then become an exception because it's just too difficult a scenario to handle. In general, if a person can't figure it out, a reasonably intelligent person with no a priori knowledge, there's no way on earth the software is going to get it either. The software is not smarter than the person, it just has complete access to all information from all time. That's its advantage. But if the information isn't present, like who is Amy, it's not going to score any better than anyone else. So possibly we could try and cross-reference Amy with this guy. Very unlikely, and again, very low confidence. A weak, what we would call a weak result. And so this one would move into probably some sort of exception handling workflow where this software basically is giving up and saying, don't know where to go with this. You, somebody else, some human or someone else who's taking responsibility for exceptions, you figure it out. I'm out. So, and I like to point this out because the software is never going to be a silver bullet. It's going to do a pretty amazing job most of the time, but there always will be exceptions. You can either construct one like I did here to fool a software system, but by and large you don't have to do that. There is always going to be some outlier that's just beyond the grasp of the ability of the software, and so you have to anticipate some exceptions. There always will be. At Valora, we strive for that number to be less than 2% of the population. We have seen as many as 5%. If you're getting exceptions higher than that, then you might want a more sophisticated engine. Something's not right. Okay, so we talked a lot about the email itself and the body content and the clues that are present in an email. There are also, of course, attachments. And attachments, as I said earlier, are kind of the total wild card because anything really can be an attachment. So let's look at how a computer classifies an attachment. Because an attachment very often is the meat of whatever is being discussed. An email sometimes is just used as essentially a transmission mechanism. Hey, Sue, take a look at this. That's the body content of the email, and it's the attachment that everybody cares about. So here's an example attachment. It happens to be a U.S. patent application. It's a public document. If you're interested, this is from Research in Motion, makers of the BlackBerry. And you can see way back in 2007. So imagine that this was the attachment to some email. I showed you one earlier, happened to be Motion in Limine. Well, imagine it was a patent application document, let's say in Word or in PDF. So the software is going to do the exact same thing. It's going to go through here and start doing that gene sequencing and collecting whatever there is to find. And I'll just give you a few examples here. Here at Valora, we capture about 600 unique attributes about every document as long as they are present. And you'll get a feel for some of them here, and on and on and on. And the good news is, again, a highly complex system should be highly configurable. And so you can basically capture anything you want out of this information so long as it's there and you can explain what it is. If you said, I'm very interested in the abstract of every patent application, can you capture that? Of course we can. It's right here. And so, again, you're looking for patterns of things. Valora's technique happens to be called, here we go, probabilistic hierarchical context-free grammars. 10 points if anybody else can say that back to me. but it's basically known as statistical pattern matching. So we are looking for patterns, the word abstract followed by, text that sort of looks like this with this kind of English language. That's our technique. There are others. If you're familiar with this, we tend to use a Bayesian technique. Again, there are others, but basically what is happening at the end of the day, regardless of your technique, is a collection of attributes that are being used to kind of, gene sequence this document and create sort of a digital fingerprint about this document. And this is the information that's used later to make assessments and dispositions about a document. Should we keep this document? It's a patent application. Yeah, we probably should. Well, if it wasn't dated 2007 but was dated, 1977, should we dump it? The patent hasn't been granted, or it has, but the application is long defunct. So these are some of the techniques that we use. You can see this classification becoming the basis for business rules about retention, about severity, about kind of permissions and security, about compliance. All of this becomes the fodder to the rules, which is really the second layer. I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So here, again, just a laundry list of the kinds of things that data mining determines about the email itself and the thing that it is communicating, the attachment. So just have a look at that. There's plenty more, but there's only so much you can fit on a slide. Okay. So I'm going to show you just a quick example of the whole thing in motion. I mentioned Powerhouse, which is our system. Again, could be anybody's name there, I suppose. There are 3 stages: this indexing, tagging, that gene sequencing, things like date, author, patent number. Then comes an analytical layer. I just mentioned that earlier, applying a set of business rules. Think of those as if-then statements. If this is about this topic and it has this date range, then I want you to move it over to this folder location. Or I want you to send out a notification to these 10 people because that's the document we've been looking for. Whatever it is. These are things that you can, kind of analyze and derive. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the presentation of that. Not every system requires presentation, but a lot of them do. Where are we going to put all this information that we now know about the documents? How are we going to provide reporting and management and control of that information? And that's usually done with some sort of combination of data visualization and hosting. And that's exactly what I will show you. So we typically do our cheesy animation here. Docs come in, they go through indexing, which you saw, they go through analytics and rules, and then they get presented, and that's what I'm going to show you now. So I mentioned data visualization. It is basically the visual representation of data. In other words, I could just show you a bunch of numbers, but I could also show you a graph or a pie chart or something like that that is immediately impactful. That's what data visualization is. And part of the art of data mining and classification and information governance is not just gathering the data, but presenting it in a way that's actually chewable to people out there. If I just said, you have 45,623,019 emails, that's not really helpful. But if I show you how they're divided up by topic and severity, that's very helpful. And so when you think about it, you've seen data visualization before. If you've ever picked up a copy of USA Today, all their little graphics in the bottom left corner, that's data visualization. So I'm just going to show you some of these. This is the sort of the last step in the chain of analyzing documents, figuring out what to do with them, and then presenting up those findings. Okay. So here are examples you already know. You've seen these. Any kind of sales chart, or here's the data down here. These are actually the same exact thing. This is the chart. This is the data. And the difference is, even with its pretty colors down here on the bottom, this is hard for people to read. It's meaningless. And up here, you can see very well that clearly sales versus operating income are moving up. If I put a trend line in, it would clearly be up and to the right. That's the point of data visualization. This is a bar chart version. Here's a pie chart version. Okay. This is a word cloud. What you're looking at here is actually a word cloud that was derived off of a Valora press release about our auto translation capabilities. This tells a lot more of the story than a 4-paragraph slog of text about auto translation. This is what's called a heat map. You've seen this, of course, if you've ever watched the weather forecast. This can be used, yes, it could be used to literally reflect heat as in temperature, or it can be used to reflect kind of the density or the preponderance of some kind of topic. If I said this wasn't literally temperature, but it was instead a reflection of who was going to vote for Donald Trump. And I'm totally making that up, by the way. Nothing meant by that. But that would have major, major implications, let's say, to somebody living in Washington versus somebody living in Alabama. And so this is how data works in a visual way. Again, just taking the numbers and putting them into a visual context that has meaning. Here's a set of those little things from USA Today that I just picked at random because they were adorable. They're excellent at data visualization. And so here's an example of what an email population might look like once it's been mined and put into a data visualization dashboard. So again, believe it or not, this is an email population that is showing all different kinds of things that have been collected about the email, like what government entities are present in it, and what's the most frequent title of the information, and so on and so forth. Everything that was collected, all those fields, all those little gene sequencing attributes can be presented here. This is just a screenshot. If you want a demo, contact me offline. This is another way of doing data visualization, of showing either what concepts are related to another one, or who talks to who, or who talks about what. All of these things, again, the bigger the bubble, the more prevalent that is in the population. Whatever it is, for some reason, this set of emails had a lot to say about smuggling and a lot of activity happening in New York. So you can kind of see here sort of topic area versus region or state. Again, anything that you capture, anything that you're analyzing can be presented like this. And then if you want to say, show me smuggling in New York, you'd click on this. It's yellow if I hover over it. Click on this, and then you will be able to access those documents. And then finally, there's usually with data visualization a way to get into the data. Yes, show me the details. And here they are, record by record by record by record. Those of you who've done any kind of litigation document review will be very familiar with this third view on data, but probably not so familiar with the other views, which can be very, very helpful at narrowing down, at drilling down to a specific topic. We've basically covered what we're going to cover today. I thought it would be important for you guys to have kind of a vocabulary list of important terms. I believe everybody's going to get a copy of this, so you will have these. Hopefully I covered most of them. If there's something else you want to know, of course, contact me. Also wanted to show you kind of what a typical email data mining project workflow looks like. Typically there are 3 phases. Again, I mentioned this earlier, start with the back file and then move, maybe with a limited user or just a small set, then do the full back file and then move into the day forward. Back file is always the harder problem, and once you've solved that, the day forward is usually pretty easy to do. And then these I'll just kind of flip through quickly, but basically these are just some tips and tools. I've mentioned a lot of them in passing. I'll just kind of leave these here, and you can take a look at them later. I do want to highlight number 7. If you're going to take on an email data mining project, have somebody who's a champion in the organization, whether it's a senior partner or somebody in the law department or the president of whatever division. Have somebody who's fairly senior, who's very excited about this, and who's willing to use themselves as the guinea pig, as that very first phase. Because once that goes successfully, and it will, because people are always blown away by what you can determine, just like you saw with the visualization, what you can determine about email just by doing analytics, that person's going to be a hero. So look for your hero wannabe and have them become your champion. A couple things just to watch out for. Any kind of data mining project is going to have big brother overtones. yes, we're going to be able to know everything and anything about anything you've ever written in your entire life. That's a little bit frightening to people. My recommendation is to just let people know that that's coming and give them an opportunity, unless documents are under legal hold. Obviously, you cannot do this. But if they're not under legal hold, give people an opportunity to clean up their mess. Okay? And that will actually help with the first bullet up here. Help remove some surprise content, which is my euphemism for perhaps unfit for work or pornographic. Give people a chance to get rid of their offending data, assuming that fits within your document retention policies. And let them know that, yes, everything will be eventually viewed one way or another, at least by a machine, and give them an opportunity to clean that up. A couple more. Again, I will just kind of focus in on the last one here, which is email is basically the largest unofficial, unregulated open portal between your organization and the world. Anything can come in via email, and anything can be an attachment. So watch out. It's kind of the sieve by which information enters or worse, enters or leaves your organization. So if you're going to choose one thing to take control of in an IG kind of manner, I recommend it be email. You want to know a little bit more about Valora? Here's who we are. And the kinds of problems we solve. Thank you very much for listening.
This technology that Sandy was showing, it's really intriguing, and beyond, I can see so many applications in the future for this type of technology. Beyond email repositories, what are some ways, some other ways that you've seen, and we've all been into different companies seeing all sorts of different things with varying degrees of success, but where we've seen data mining and text analytics applied, where have you guys seen them applied? We were looking at email in this example, or some other ways.
It's applied a lot in marketing today. The digital marketing suites, pretty much all of them have some kind of analytics capability, but I'm probably not exaggerating, that there's at least around 100 startups that are focused purely on analytics for marketing. So behavior analysis, absolutely, but just how to get you to buy the next thing or show you the next thing. But that's happening, and it's I think we're hidden from it a little bit at the moment. We all know it's there, but give it a year or two and bang, it's left, right, and center.
Yeah.
I can give you a couple other examples, just things that we've worked on. This presentation was about email and attachments. Other things that are sort of brethren that we've done, contracts analysis. So, everybody's got 40, 50 years of contracts. If there's one document you don't throw out, it's an agreement. And so there's all kinds of text analytics for contracts. Another area where there are the two big areas that are kind of up and coming. One is banking, and particularly mortgage files, because there's just so much paperwork that goes with that, and now there's so much supervision and compliance that has to take place. And then the other one, of course, is in healthcare, to try and figure out what's wrong with this person, or what do we know about them over the course of their lifetime, as opposed to the last test we just took. So those are just some other areas that's the same type of technology in play.
And I'll give you a variation on the theme. You talk about it in marketing terms, Alan. The client just the other day was talking about they're in a very specialized niche of the insurance industry, power plants, and so they have information in documents going literally back decades, multiple decades, of open issues to be addressed and whether or not they were addressed and how long, all that stuff. And it was not quite like this, but it almost came across as if they just realized one day, we have all this information here that we could really use when it comes to premium setting for those clients.
Right.
So it's the same idea as the marketing, but it has more to do with ongoing customer service. What I find most fascinating about this sort of thing is, earlier you used one of my favorite words to talk about, holistic. We're here to talk about this in a more holistic way. There are those who would say that's not analytics, that's business intelligence. To which I respond, that's the difference.
Yeah, I think where it's going. I mean, where it's going though is into predictive analytics, because I think the lessons of the past, the BI lessons of the past, is we've got all this data, we can analyse it, and now what?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and moving forward, I think we'll see this become more pervasive. So you're seeing the leading companies taking on this advanced technology and leveraging it in creative and innovative ways, and it's starting to move more towards the middle market, and we'll eventually see it become more pervasive. But then we'll move beyond just these the applications that we're seeing today and see new applications. So one of the things that I've been a big proponent of in understanding what the future of this information profession is going to look like is this concept of emergent information, where you're in a system, you're doing work, and the information comes to you as you need it, based on your activities, based on your history, and based on what the systems know about you. And you can sort of see the groundwork being laid for those future systems here. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of people working on that. The issue with it is, because it's not new, and it's much better to that.
Yeah.
There's new approaches to it. But in the past, and in fact you brought it up in your presentation, it's about the accuracy level. If, for example, I'm pushing information at you, and it's accurate 75% of the time, that means a quarter of the time it's not, and that's really irritating. You've got to get to a ridiculously accurate point before it really becomes valid. So it's a long learning curve, but it's definitely happening. But that's been the downfall when people have gone live way too quickly with those things, and people only notice the mistakes. They don't notice the
Right, of course. But the sort of the flip side of that is if you can narrow down the push aspect, what we would here call notifications, to only the most severe of circumstances, then even if it's wrong, it's okay, I want to know, I have to know, and I can live with the 1 in 4. Usually it's not quite so bad. Usually it's more like 1 in 10, maybe. 10% failure rate, not 25% failure rate. That is perfectly fine for people, especially in the most dire of circumstances. So whether it's an email or a tweet that's reacting to some sort of analytic event, generally that's pretty favorable.
Yeah,
and the trick is to tune it.
It's
so
about
that you
it's all about the tuning.
Yeah.
It's all about tuning, and in marketing, I mean, because my team used to look at digital marketing, but the thing is they're too ambitious, right? So they're always throwing out another ad at you and another ad, and so you just switch off. If they throw out 2 ads a month and you buy something off one of them, that's an incredibly powerful campaign. And I think the world of marketing is just starting to get that it's all about fine-tuning it so it's super accurate.
I think in a business setting, you have to fine-tune the people, too, in terms of their expectations.
That's true.
And it's interesting, so many of the things we talked about earlier come home to roost here, and they will again and again, I'm sure. What is an acceptable exception rate? And I think it depends on whether the one doing the pushing or the one being pushed at. I had a client once where they were using the wrong threshold. They were looking for 0% exceptions.
Impossible.
And even though they went from like 30 to 15, how do you define success? Like you said before, they thought it was awful. It's like, are you kidding? You cut it in half, but it's not 0. Well, you realize it can't ever be 0, right?
Right.
So there are all these things that go way beyond even how good is the technology, which is pretty good if you do it right. But you can't just abdicate all responsibility and say, here, the technology will do it.
Yeah, we get that a lot. Folks think that the technology is a silver bullet.
Yeah.
And it's going to be perfect all the time, and no one will ever have to do any work again. And that's really not true. We very much try to disabuse people of that expectation. If you think it's perfect, you're only fooling yourself. Pretty good, and you have to put those fail-safe mechanisms in for when it fails, or when if it knows it fails, or even if it doesn't know it failed. How are you going to recover that? So that's really where the art and skill, where
So it's just thinking.
people come in.
Yeah.
You're really on the forefront of this, Sandy. So have you seen the sentiment towards these technologies change over time? I know have you seen that shift firsthand?
Absolutely. We used to spend all of our time demonstrating that the technology actually worked and convincing people, no, see, you really can determine an author. That was what the conversation was around. Today, that's absolutely given. They might want to just check, oh yeah, I get it, okay. You show it once and they've got it. Now the discussion is all around exception handling and how do you go up against situations where there is sort of a zero tolerance? And you're seeing this actually change legally because the law was one of those places where either was right or wrong. And like already the federal rules of civil procedure are changing to accommodate uncertainty. There are things like what's called a clawback provision, which is if the system makes a mistake and a document is produced, you can actually claw it back. Because everybody's relying on technology to do the work, and there's a certain failure rate. So that's an example. This whole notion of the recent changes about proportionality, and what that means is essentially using technology and services and systems that are proportionate to the scope of the case, and not trying to throw a $3 million product on a $200,000 case matter. So when you have that, there's that certain accommodation around maybe it's pretty good. We talked about that earlier. Maybe there's a certain amount of error. We can live with that. And here's what we'll do when an error condition hits. Historically, that was unheard of on the legal setting, and now very much commonplace. And so if that's sort of a trendsetter for everything else.
But parallel to that, if you look at the capture world, right, the scanning and capture world, which is not one Steve may know more about it than I, but certainly in my relatively recent experience, there are still many, many, many organisations out there who still don't trust ICR, OCR, and they will pay an army of people to manually input the data.
But even that is slowly shifting over time.
It is slowly shifting, but it's shifting more slowly than I think most of us expected.
Yeah, very much so.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I just did.
Another one?
Changing tack slightly, and I think this may be a little different in the legal setting, but for a long time, zeroed in on email is one of those places where people think it's theirs, even though it's not. I talk about me now, and my question is, do you get pushback from users, may not be in the legal because they may get it more, in terms of, well, this stuff is all great, but you're meddling in my email?
That may be a momentary objection until someone explains to them just whose email that is. And, historically, yes, legal has an advantage because when legal says thou shalt, then thou shalt.
Yeah.
And so that kind of objection sort of fades away very quickly. But I don't know. And in other circumstances, I mean, we do some things beyond legal. I think by and large today there's been enough in the popular press, enough, kind of about data breaches and whatnot that say, no, the email, the contents, everything belongs to the organization, and you as the individual, you're really just kind of a conduit for data in or out of the organization. Other than blatant negligence, I don't think that. I think it's very naive for people to claim it's my mail.
Although I still run into it.
Do you really?
Regularly. I don't think it's as frequently as it used to be, but certainly regularly. And the whole notion of, the computer you're using at work isn't yours either. And I don't care what you have stored on it or if you're doing electronically. If there's a case, your computer's evidence and it's going away.
But do you not think, I think we were just talking to my colleague David Hogan, or ex-colleague I should say, he's going to be on the next one. It's probably a question for him, but something I discussed with him many times was that people, forget the negligent, the ones who are actually doing insider trading and whatever, they don't do it on the corporate email.
No.
They're not that dumb.
Well, some of them are.
Well, maybe some of them are. Maybe some of them.
We've seen those.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? I think people get it these days. There's they Snapchat.
Yeah.
They just work around it.
Well, let's shift gears, Sandy. Thank you. That was excellent, and obviously started some great conversations there that I'm sure will continue after this next.